Jasmine finds a flagpole casts a shadow that is 25 meters long. By the way, you notice it said example 4 instead of example 3, and I somehow skipped it, but it'll still work. All right, so Jasmine sees this 25-meter long shadow from the flagpole, and the angle of elevation to the sun is 45 degrees. What is the height of the flagpole to the nearest tenth of a meter? Actually, I didn't do the rounding on this. I'll leave that to you. So I'm not really big into decimals. And what is the angle of depression? All right, so I drew a picture. Here's the flagpole, and I'm just really measuring to the top of the pole. I'm not going to mess with the flag. And there's the sun. The angle of elevation, this 45 degrees, needs to be right there. So first of all, let me label my shadow. It's 25 meters, so there it is. Angle of elevation, 45 degrees. That's this part right here. And I'm looking for the height, which is this part. So, first of all, if one side is 45 and the other side is 45, that's the 45, 45, 90 triangle. So I draw it straight from the math chart. I'm going to solve this two ways again. I'm going to do one with a proportion, and then I'm going to do one straight from the math chart. You can think of this x sort of as a scale factor. This one is actually easier with the math chart, but I'm still going to show the proportion. So here are the corresponding sides on the math chart problem. But if I'm going to do a proportion, I'm going to use a simpler one. I'm going to make a 1, 1, square root of 2, which I get by putting a 1 in for all the x's. Then I'm just going to go ahead and make a proportion of blue to pink, and substitute y over 25 equals 1 over 1. Cross multiply, and you get y equals 25. So the height is 25 meters. Not very difficult. The other way to solve this, and it's really pretty simple, is that you set these two values equal. X equals 25 because this side equals that. You're trying to find the scale factor, which means if that side's 25, then that side's 25. All right? Now the angle of depression is going to always be the same as the angle of elevation, so it's 45 degrees. Now in our last example, Dee is helping her brother fly a kite, and the length of the string between them and the kite is 50 yards. Dee sees that the angle of elevation from her to the kite is 60 degrees. What is the height or vertical distance of the kite? And I'm not going to really take into account the height of Dee. I could make it more tricky, but we're not going to worry about that today. What is the horizontal distance from D to the kite? And what is the angle of depression from the kite to D? So pretend D's over here, the kite's way up there, and there's a string connecting them. And then I drew a vertical distance, not very good straight line, and there's a horizontal distance. That one's better. All right. So I know the string's 50 yards, so let's mark that, 50 yards. And I know the angle of elevation is 60 degrees. There is 60 degrees. Now I'm trying to find the vertical distance. So that means this distance right here, which I'll label y. The reason I'm using y instead of x is because our math chart has an x on it, and I don't want us to get confused. So I'm just trying to use a different variable. Speaking of which, this is, since that's 60 degrees, this is the 30, 60, 90 special, right? Which I'll draw down here. And so the 60, you can see I drew it so it's all lined up correctly with my drawing. And I'm going to solve it. After I mark, you can see there's the corresponding right there to the y, and that's the corresponding for the hypotenuse or the string. I'm going to solve this first with a proportion, and then I'll use the scale factor x. So using a proportion, I prefer to get rid of the x's by substituting in 1. So I've got 1, 2, square root of 3. You notice that it's 1, 2, square root of 3. Kind of cool. And the square root of 3 is always opposite the 60. So mark the corresponding sides. And I have pink and blue. So I have a pink and blue proportion. Substituting y over 50 equals square root of 3 over 2. Cross multiply. 2y equals 50 over times square root of 3. I can divide both sides by 2, so y is 25 times the square root of 3. These numbers outside, you can just divide them like normal. Inside, if they're all inside, you can divide them like normal, but you can't really divide the square root of 3 by 2 very simply. So, again, these whole numbers out here in front of the radical, you can multiply and divide just like normal. So let's go ahead and do this another way, which you may find faster with the scale factor. So this time I'm not going to worry about the 1, 2, square root of 3 triangle. I am just going to use these sides. And I say, okay, I just need to find out what my scale factor x is. So I'm going to set this equal to the 50 yards. 2x equals 50, which means x has to be 25. Then I know that y has to equal square root of 3x. And then I put in what x is, which is 25. But I don't like the 25 behind the radical. I put it in front since it's not inside of the radical. And that's my answer. So some of you may like this way a lot better than the proportion. Finally, I need to know also the horizontal distance. Well, I already solved for x, right? So we figured out that was 25. So the horizontal distance is 25, all right? And then the angle of depression is the same as the angle of elevation. So since the angle of elevation here is 60, then the angle of depression is 60 degrees. Now your reflection. You're standing on the ground looking at the top of a skyscraper. What happens to the angle of elevation, the angle at your eye from the ground to the top of the skyscraper, as you walk towards a skyscraper? So it helps to draw a picture. And you can see here that your angle of elevation would be right here, right? And then as you walk closer to the building, you're actually going to have to look up a little more. As you get closer and closer, you're eventually going to get really close. You won't look straight up, but pretty close to it. So that means the angle's doing what? Is the skyscraper's far away? And then it gets closer and closer and closer. What happens to that angle? So hopefully that gives you plenty of information to write your sentence or two.